There were at least 5,000 farmers out there waiting to see me and hear me talk. And that's the gospel truth. Now, you don't get 5,000 farmers at one place at 5 in the morning, which, by the way, is milking time, without having a lot of nervous cows. And I have to believe by afternoon there must have been one hell of a run on buttermilk. Well, I will confess, from time to time there was a little doom and gloom on that campaign trail. One of my young speechwriters, Clark Clifford, came up to me one day, and he was a fine young man. He said, "Mr. President, can I talk with you?" I said, "Sure, son." Is it about a speech? No. I just want to tell you, you're headed for the gallows. Well, I looked at Clark and I said, "Clark, do you know what the gallows are?" He said, "No, sir. They're a platform from which miracle plays are performed, and the lead actor is translated into heaven." Well, Clark looked at me with his mouth wide open. But I'll tell you what, folks, I wasn't ready yet to climb that stairway into heaven, so we kept campaigning across the country. And then finally it was election day. Now, my candidate, or not mine, but the Republican Party's candidate, Thomas E. Dewey, did what most of you didn't do on election day. He voted for the party the experts said would win. Now, the following day, the experts had eaten so much crow that the conservationists were worried that the species might disappear from the face of the earth. Now, on my way back to the White House, I stopped in St. Louis, got a copy of the paper. I don't have it with me today, but it was the Chicago Daily Tribune. And I looked at it, I read the headline, and then I looked below the headline, and on that paper, right on the front page, it says, "The world's greatest newspaper." And the headline said, do you remember, folks?
Yeah.
What did it say?
Dewey wins.
That's right. So I wonder if they printed the world's greatest newspaper on their next edition. Nobody thought I would win. I also remember one of my other speechwriters, he stopped in a small town and got all the magazines he could. Because I asked him to, and I told him to review them, see how I was doing. Came back, said nothing to me. I knew he was hiding those magazines in his coat. I said, "Now, come on, take those magazines out." "How do I look?" He said, "You don't look at all." I said, "What do you mean at all?" He said, No one. I can't find anyone that says you're going to win the election." I said, "That's fine. They're not the ones that are going to put me in. It's the people we're talking to." Well, I got back to Washington. I had an opulent inauguration, folks. That was because the 80th Republican Congress voted for so much money to have a big feast because they were convinced their candidate was going to win. And I'll tell you this, I only drink a little bit of bourbon each day, and the Lord has told me just keep it to a little, Harry. But there was so much liquor in that old town, it could have staggered. I remember, as I come to a close talking with you this morning, those days in the office, I had to take a walk every day just to get out among the people. And it was coming to a close of my time in the White House, and it was going to be my final walk. I knew it. Because it was just while my term was ending. And some other people knew it, the press. So I stepped outside, and all the press were there. So I told them, I said, boys, I just want to take this time to tell you, I like you. I really do. And they all looked at me, with their eyes wide open. I said, now listen, it's amazing what a man can learn by reading the newspaper that he didn't know about himself. And then I said, now boys, I'm just kidding, but I feel just like Thomas Jefferson when he said if he had to choose between no government and no press, how would he choose? And Jefferson said, I'll choose no government all the time. Well, I remember that last walk. I was joking with him, but I asked him if there was any place where we were walking where we could knock down a few in the name of liberty. They said no, so I said, let's go the other direction. Well, then they brought out the fact that Richard Nixon was calling one of the great statesmen in my administration, Dean Acheson, the Red Dean. And what did I think about it? Well, I said, boys, now if you think Dean Acheson, General George Marshall, another great American that served with in my administration, and myself are communists, well, I said, then we're in one hell of a fix. I told him, I said, listen, and that Nixon fella, he could lie out of both sides of his mouth at the same time. And if he ever caught himself telling the truth, he'd probably put a lie in just to keep his hand in it. Then they asked me about Kennedy. I said, well, Kennedy's a fine boy. I think he's going to turn out to be a good senator. It's his father I'm worried about. And one of the press yelled out, what do you mean, his father? I said, well, what father do you know that can buy their son West Virginia? And then someone said something about Catholicism. I said, no, being a Catholic has nothing to do with it. It's not the Pope, it's the Pop that concerns me. And I met a little fella on that walk. And I think I'll just end by telling you my experience with him. His name was Tim George. He came up to me and wanted to know if this was a parade. I said, no. This is just an old codger and some of his friends taking a walk. And he asked me my name. I said, well, it's Harry Truman. You know, what's your name? And he said, Tim George. So I shook his hand. Then just as innocently as a little boy could say, he said, what do you do? I said, I'm the President of the United States. He stepped back a little bit and said, you run the country? And I said, no, son. I said, we got a lot of good people that do that. I just make sure everything's going along smooth so that when the time comes, we can turn it over to folks like yourself when you're ready. And I said, we've been doing that for over 200 years, and it's worked pretty well. So I told the boys, I said, you know, the boys in the press, I said, that little fella Tim George reminds me. We've got to keep all our youth excited and inspired about the past and the future of our country. I said, now it's not the high school kids that worry me. It's those college kids. They seem to think they know it all. And I've spoken in front of quite a few during my presidency, and I tell them, it's what you learn after you think you know it all that really counts. And I opened it up to questions, and I remember one fellow in the back asked me what I thought about eavesdropping. I said, now wait a minute, you mean listening to other people's conversations? He said, yes. I said, that's a notorious violation of the Bill of Rights. Someone asked about a super government. I wasn't quite sure what he meant, but I said, now if you think there's going to be a dictatorship in this country, no, I won't believe it'll happen. But I said, it does remind me of a story. This man wakes up in a coffin, holding a lily, asking himself, if I'm alive, what am I doing here? And if I'm dead, why do I have to go to the bathroom? I said, no, there won't be a super government. I said, I tell you what's worse than that. A liar in office. And the press looked at me with their mouths wide open. Why? I said, well, why? Because somebody will believe them. And then we should show that notorious bastard as much compassion as he showed the Constitution of the United States. No less, no more. Then I think they understood. And I told them, and I'll tell you folks, and you know already, because you're good Christians and good Americans, always do what you believe is right. You'll gratify some and astonish the rest. Someone asked me, what's it been like being President of the United States? Oh, no, that's a complicated question, I said. Kind of reminds me, though, of a young man. I was going to his dear wife's funeral, and the funeral director asked him if he wouldn't mind riding into the cemetery in the same car with his mother-in-law. He said he would, but it would ruin his entire day. I have to admit, most of my days were good. They were ruined. Because I have a faith. I have a strong faith. I always told myself I was a Lightfoot Baptist. Most of my family were Baptists. You see, my family believed the Baptists, now I know you are Congregationalists, so you'll You'll have to bear with me here. These Baptist folks have rigid thinking sometimes. But they felt the Baptists had the inside track to happiness after the grave. I knew other folks could find that track of happiness as well. And I just have to tell you this. It kind of maybe relates to why I like King Solomon so much. My favorite relative was my grandfather, Solomon Young. He was a very independent man, and he hated hypocrites. I remember when I was a little boy, he came up to me, put his arm around my shoulder, and said, "Now, Harry, when you grow up, you just remember, if a man howls too long on Saturday night and prays too loud on Sunday morning, you go home and lock up your smokehouse." Well, folks, I have to admit, I had my first taste of hypocrites on my first job. I got that job at Jim Clinton's drugstore on the square in Independence, Missouri. I had to go in early in the morning and sweep the floors, clean out the medicine bottles. And I got quite an education watching that anti-saloon and church-going crowd. Not folks like you who have a deep faith, but those other folks. Go in and go to the back room and get their eye opener. Jim sold it to them for 10 cents an ounce. Now when they got those blamed eyelids of theirs open, they looked through a little peephole back there and see if anyone was coming in the drugstore before they left. Well, that was my first taste with hypocrites, and I've had nothing to do with them ever since. But before I leave you, I want to go back to Proverbs, because the book has guided my life. Let's see if I can see it, a small print. This is from Proverbs 16. How much better is it to get wisdom than gold, and to get understanding rather to be chosen than silver? The highway of the upright is to depart from evil. He that keepeth his way preserveth his soul. Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Better it is to be of humble spirit with the lowly, and to divide the spoil with the proud. He that handleth the matter wisely shall find good, and whoso trusteth in the Lord, happy is he. And I have to tell you, folks, I'm very happy today because of my faith in the author of this Holy Bible. Thank you very much.